Hello everyone and welcome back to the CDL podcast channel, and oh boy do we have a lot to dig into today. It was an absolutely crazy weekend of matches, maybe the most crazy we've seen all this year just because of, all the unexpected upsets that happened, and my pick'ems certainly suffered from those unexpected upsets. I kind of went a little safer this weekend, and then the one risk match I took, taking Paris over Dallas, obviously did not go my way. But please be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy this video, and maybe share it with a friend that loves the CDL, grow our community a little bit. But yeah, this one is going to be a crazy one. We're going to be talking about some of the crazy stuff that went on this weekend, as well as some possible rumors that I've heard. We're going to get into probably the dumbest power rankings I've ever done because the CDL is just all over the place right now with top teams struggling and bottom teams looking like they're tournament champions. So this is like the dumbest power rankings I've ever done. It's basically just throwing people on a page and guessing at this point. But I also want to do a new segment in this video that'll come more towards the end of the video. So stay tuned until deeper in the video following the power rankings, because it involves you guys. You guys are kind of the thing that either makes the segment work or make it unsuccessful, and I'll stop doing it. But it involves you guys commenting. It's going to be called a hot or not section, and involve your thoughts on some random hot takes. So I'm going to offer some kind of hot take that is controversial, and maybe I don't even believe it, but it'll spark good discussion. And spark some good controversy in the comments to just get a good discussion going between you and me, and even some of you guys back and forth. So stay tuned to the video following probably around the power rankings to get involved in that discussion. Like I said, it'll be just some random hot take, and I'll say here, this is what I think. Do you guys think that's hot, meaning it's a good idea, or is it not, thinking that they should do something else, or the idea doesn't work for that team that's most likely involved with it. But that'll probably happen after the power rankings, so stay tuned, because I kind of thought of that as an idea for a segment, and I would love to do it in every video and have you guys maybe offer, tweet me or something if you have an idea, after the matches on Sunday or anytime during the weekend. If you have an idea for a question, just tweet me and say, hey, this is a hot take I have based on this match. And then if I'm yeah, that's a hot take that could spark a decent debate, I'll just mention you in the video, say, hey, this user on Twitter tweeted this at me, and then I'll use it in the next video or something, and it could just kind of be a fun thing to get a discussion going. So yeah, stay tuned for that after the power rankings, but we're going to go over all the matches and stuff before that. We'll get into that a little later. So yeah, I think we are going to do that after the power rankings, so stay tuned for that, and we're going to hop right into the matches first. Just kind of go over pretty quickly, hopefully. I get a little long-winded sometimes, but we'll go over each individual match, obviously spend more time on some than others, just like usual. But there are a lot of ones that we want to spend a little bit of time on because there were some crazy upsets. So without further ado, we'll just get right into the matches. Like I said, my predictions struggled immensely because I didn't want to be that guy that picked Rocker to beat OpTic or Dallas since it was their first match as a team, and obviously they beat both of them. And I have a lot of faith in Paris, so I picked Paris to win both matches, and they got beaten both matches. So, I went LA Thieves over London. So just overall, my pick'ems just did not go well. Did not go well at all this week, but, that's going to happen. I'm not all that concerned. I would rather have my pick'ems go horribly and have the sheer amount of entertaining matches we had this weekend than have my pick'ems perfect and have boring chalk matches, because I'd much rather just see chaos than have my pick'ems be right. But in the first match we saw Dallas versus Paris. Obviously in my pick'ems I went with Paris 3-2 over Dallas. Like I said in the video, that wasn't something I think Paris is better than Dallas, I think they're going to win. It was just kind of a bold prediction, trying to separate myself from the pack since I was towards the top. And obviously it didn't go right. Like I said, if you're going to be smart, pick Dallas in this matchup because they are better than Paris. But Paris was looking hot recently, so I went with the upset, and obviously Paris cooled down. In this first series, Crim played super well. All of Dallas played super well. They're all around 1.1, and they just looked just sound and solid pretty much the whole way through. They won that opening hardpoint by about 50, then they lost the express search. They don't seem to be a very good express search team, so that might be a veto for them coming up. And then they win the control and the next hardpoint again. So they just dominated them in respawns. It's a little concerning for Dallas that they lost the search to Paris, and as we saw later in the weekend, they lost 2 searches in the same series to lose it. But a little concerning that they lose the search, in my opinion, because Paris has been so bad. And I believe, I don't remember who it was, somebody on broadcast, or I heard it somewhere, I can't remember exactly where, but I believe Dallas was 30-19 in search and destroys in Modern Warfare, and they already have 11 or 12 losses after this weekend in search. Obviously, they're playing a lot more matches this year because you have the 5-5 for each regular season stuff. So I think they probably are playing on pace to play more matches than they did in Modern Warfare. But still, it's a little bit concerning that they're getting close to losing as many searches as they did last year. They just don't seem as comfortable in search and destroy. I don't know if that's a losing Clayster factor, or maybe guys like illey and shottzyy aren't as comfortable in 4v4 possibly. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but they just don't look that great. And then on the side of Paris, Aqua played awesome like he normally did. He had a 1.2. Scraps played really well like he's been heating up lately. And then Fire was just absolutely horrendous. Classic didn't play all that well either, but Classic is more of a dirty work guy. Fire, I mean, he was negative 24 in KD in the series. He went 56 and 80 overall. Just not at all a good match for Fire. I mean, the opening hardpoint he didn't play too bad, but like in the search he played well, but then like control he went 14 and 28, and then the last hardpoint he went 10 and 20. He went double neg in both the game 3 control and the game 4 hardpoint. I mean, we'll talk about Fire a little bit later, possibly a little sneak peek for our hot take section I just talked about, but I mean, he's just continues to struggle. And Dallas, once again, solid series from them in the respawns, but all weekend they look pretty good in the respawns in both their matches. Their search and destroy is just a concern. And then the next match, we thought that this day might be poor because Dallas gets the win over Paris like you'd expect. And then, I mean, OpTic has looked pretty good lately, so we were expecting them to come in and probably beat a new Minnesota team. And then Standy said, no, screw that. I'm going to take over. And Standy was unbelievable. Minnesota 3-0 at OpTic, and like OpTic's 3-0 later in the week where they got beat by Florida was actually close. They could have won some of the maps. But to be honest with you, they got pretty much just handled. The search was a little bit close. It went to around 10 on raid, and then the control was 3-1 with some closer rounds. But the hardpoint was not even a contest. I mean, Dashy had a 0.3 in it. The best KD on OpTic in that hardpoint was a 0.73 from Formal. Priesta was awesome. Accuracy was awesome. Attached, Standy, they were all just awesome. That game 1 was just one of those maps where it's just total domination from one side. And this was kind of shocking. Like I said, whenever a team makes a roster change like this and they bring in a talented player like Standy, you expect them to probably play like pretty well, and at least take the team. Like we saw with Insight in his first series on Toronto against LA Thieves, he had a crazy series. He played awesome, but they lose 3-2. Like that seems to be what happens in a lot of people's debut series when they're coming onto a team that's really been struggling. It seems like most times that individual player may go off, but the team falls just short. But that was definitely not the case in this match. I mean, Minnesota just thoroughly dominated OpTic. I mean, I don't even know exactly how to take away from this, because now that we've seen Minnesota win 2 matches, I feel like your takeaway from Minnesota can be like, yeah, obviously this roster change worked. Their pacing looks a lot better. Accuracy looks a lot more comfortable on the map. Priesta especially looks a lot more comfortable on the map, and Attach has consistently been playing well pretty much all year. He's been like the one staple of their team. So for them, it's like, you know, you still struggle in respawns later in the week, but overall it's a pretty good takeaway. And for OpTic, it sounds weird because after this match, I was just kind of like, you know what? You played a team that was just red hot and in a honeymoon period, and you know what? It's just a 3-0. Like, it'll happen. You're OpTic. You'll bounce back. But then they get 3-0 later in the week, so it's like having me question a little bit. Overall, I would say it's not time to panic for OpTic. They certainly have things to work on. It's not like they just had one play go wrong or something in both series. No, it was numerous plays, just like not smart plays that were happening. So just a rough series from OpTic, but I mean, Minnesota's the real deal, I think. I think they're pretty darn good. And the next match going into Friday was LA Thieves London. This one I honestly expected LA Thieves to take because I thought, you know, London is improving, but LA Thieves still, I thought was like a top 6 team. Even after the roster change, I thought they could possibly be a top 6 team, but they looked rough, to say the least, this weekend. They get taken out 3-1 by London. Paul X is a beast. And on the side of London, honestly, Zed played awesome as well. He had like a 1.18. Dylan played awesome. Good to see, 1.17. And then Paul X was a 1.3. Shawnee only had a 0.93. I mean, it's the same thing for me with Shawnee. He's a main AR, so I just feel like his KD should be better. And like I said, they're winning matches, so I could care less about your KD if you're finding ways to win the match. KD is one of those things that I always say it. It's something that you should, like, if somebody's consistently dropping like a 0.6, there's a big issue there. But somebody like Shawnee, who's always dropping like a 0.95, I mean, for your main AR, that's a little bit low. You would expect him to get a little higher than that, but they're winning matches and he's making all the right plays, so it's really not that important. If that kind of makes sense, like, it's not all that important for the main AR to have like a crazy KD if he's making all the right plays. Obviously, if he's down around a 0.8 for a main AR, that's pretty bad. So KD really only matters in extreme scenarios. Like when somebody's dropping a 1.5, they're either baiting like crazy or they're just insane. And then if somebody's dropping like a 0.6, it's like, okay, they're just really struggling. It's only like in the extreme circumstances. When you're on like the 0.9 to 1.1 range, it really doesn't make all that much of a difference. And in this series, like, I mean, LA Thieves came out, they won that opening checkmate hardpoint off a good rotation. Venom made a big play there at the end. And they won at 250 to 243. But then the Search and Destroy, they got 6-2'd. The control was one of the most dominant controls we've ever seen. I mean, yeah, if you pull up the scoreboard, TJ had the most kills on LA Thieves in that control with 7. 7 kills. The lowest KD in London was Zed with a 1.57. I mean, Paul X at a 5.33. He went 16-3. And then that last Moscow hardpoint, they won 250 to 245. London did to take the series 3-1. But overall, this is a weird series to have a takeaway because London wins again, and we hadn't obviously seen them win much, and all of a sudden now they're 2-0 in their group. So it's like you want to say London is extremely improved, but at the same time, after watching LA Thieves again later in the week, they literally look like they didn't even belong on the map with Faze. So it's tough to say that London like is super improved. Obviously, London is improved. I mean, they couldn't win a match before, and now they've won 2 matches. But I feel like it's a sign that London is certainly getting better, but at the same time, it's not a sign that London is like crazy better because LA Thieves is super struggling, and on the LA Thieves side, it's like they're lost. I mean, they're flat out lost. And the second match of that day was New York versus LAG. If you guys know the way I do my pick'ems, I'm not shocked at all that New York won. I just never really have faith in LAG to win much of a match, and I think that New York is probably one of the top teams right now, if not maybe the second best team with the way Dallas and OpTic have looked recently. In this series, pretty much everybody in New York did what we'd expect. They were all around 1.1, and then Mac was in the 0.9s. On the side of Los Angeles Guerrillas, your 2 guys that you really want to step up for you and be your Slayers, and Vivid and Apathy, were both 0.86, 0.95, respectively. So they just simply didn't do enough to win. And then your main AR Assault is only +1 on the series. I mean, overall, this is just a talent issue for me, in my opinion. LA Guerrillas can play as structured as they want, but they lose all 3 respawns to lose the series. I mean, obviously that last Garrison hardpoint was close and the control was close, but I mean, when it just comes down to something, it's like the talent of New York just edges out LAG because I mean Clay's gonna outplay Assault on the AR talent-wise pretty much every time. Then when you look at the flex, like Diamond Khan, at this point, talent-wise, gun skill-wise, he's probably better than Silly, and then I'll take the duo of Mac and Asim over Vivid and Apathy all day. It's just, at this point, you can only play so structured. Like for LAG, that structured play is going to get them wins against some of the lower teams, but when you play a team that's just got more talent and also has a pretty good structure like New York, they're going to beat you, and that's what happened here. Then going into Saturday, we started off with New York and London. This was an interesting match because London was undefeated coming into the day. They looked very good, and obviously New York is what we consider one of our top teams. And London didn't necessarily play it like terrible, but they kind of showed they fit exactly where I think they do. A team that is improving and can beat some of the lower tier teams, and they'll hang with the upper level teams, but probably not beat them. Although they were very competitive overall in it. So like that's what I'm saying is I feel like London has now gotten into that middle tier a little bit where like they're going to beat the lower tier teams and then they'll hang in and have a chance to beat the top teams, but you're still going to pick them to lose to the top teams because they certainly hung in the series. I mean, that first hardpoint, they lost by about 40. And the Search went to around 11 on Express. Obviously, they were up 5-1 in it. Kind of had the little mini full sale happen, so they should have honestly been able to win that Search. And then the Control, they take it 3-2, and then the hardpoint, they lose by 20. So, I mean, all these maps here, I mean, that opening hardpoint, they lose by about 40. You could have won that. The Search, you're up 5-1. You should have won it. Then the Control, you win. And then the hardpoint, the last one, you lose by 20. Like, overall, they could have won almost every map in this series. But clearly they don't. I mean, Zed struggled in that map 1 hardpoint. I know. I'm not sure overall how he did. Yeah, everybody on London was around a 1. And then Paul X went crazy again with like a 1.2. And everybody on New York's around a 1 in this series. But this is just like the general takeaway for me for a lot of middle tier teams. It's a good sign though if you're a London fan. I will say it's good because before London was certainly not in the middle tier and we were expecting them to beat nobody. But now Dylan's kind of coming into his own a little bit more, playing a little better. Zed looks very good in his role. Paul X looks like the superstar that they need. That superstar potential to take over on the map. And Shawnee's always going to be Mr. Consistent on the main AR. He's never going to be a superstar, but he's going to do his job. So for London, I would say if you're a fan, I'd be hyped. You're on the upswing. Like you have London now is not like the team that you go into, like if they're playing a top team, it's like, well, here's a 3-0 blowout. Now it's like London's probably going to lose this series, but you know what? They could potentially, if they play well on that day, pull off the upset. Because probably before we knew LA Thieves was really going to struggle going into that match, even we would have thought 100% LA Thieves is going to win it. And then London comes out solid and sticks it to them. I mean, London is certainly improving, and New York, once again, it was good to see them have a 2-0 week. They looked very good, and I'm really excited for them. They moved up in my power rankings, we'll say that. You'll see when we get there, but they certainly moved up due to some inconsistencies from other teams. The next match that day was Atlanta Faze versus LA Thieves. I mean, let's be honest, there's not a lot to talk about here. This was just a complete and utter beatdown. I mean, the map won hardpoint. They win by 100 points. The search went like 6-3. Yeah, and then the control was one of the most disrespectful things I've ever seen. That last round, they're up like 20 to like 4 on lives, and they just started going for pistol kills and beatdowns. And then the final kill on Venom, they just went for the assassination and stuff. And they panned over to the LA Thieves camera after the match, and Slasher wasn't even sitting there anymore. He had already gotten up and left like before the map was over. LA Thieves seems to be in shambles. We'll talk about it a little bit later, but it sounds like there could potentially be a roster change going. And if the roster change goes through that I've heard could possibly go through, I'm going to throw a riot because it's one of my favorite players again getting benched for no apparently good reason. But I can't even believe that I gave LA Thieves one map in this. Like, if I could go back and I lock my predictions and stuff after I make the video because I don't want to change them from what I had in the video because it makes for poor content. But if I would have been able to see LA Thieves get smoked by London Royal Ravens like that, I would have changed my prediction from earlier in the week to 3-1. I would have changed it definitely to 3-0 Faze. That's what happened. I mean, Faze just dominated. There's no other way to say this. Atlanta is on a different level. There is no team even closer to their level currently, and LA Thieves is on the downfall. The last match of Saturday was Toronto Ultra versus LAG. This one went the distance. This was a super fun series to watch, actually. I wasn't like expecting it to be one of the top of the weekend. I thought it could be close because I know they're both kind of lower tier teams, but the series ended up being super entertaining. The first hardpoint wasn't all that close, but the second hardpoint was close. And then, I mean, the second search, some of the rounds were closer. I mean, obviously, LAG takes it 6-2, despite some close rounds. The control was a 3-0, but that last raid search from Toronto was just a clinic. It was a 6-0. They dominated them. But this series, I wasn't expecting it to go 5 at all, but it did. And like I said, the maps weren't awesome, but it's kind of fun to watch a 5-game series. And LAG, honestly, their KDs, again, they were all around a 0.9, and then Silly had a really good series, like a 1.2. Insight really took over for them. Bance finally had a good series. It's about time. And then Cammy and Kleenex didn't play all that well, but, I mean, those are probably your two superstars. Bance finally had a good series for once this year. And Toronto won it 3-2. I mean, once again, there's not a whole lot to take away from me here besides the fact that LAG is who I thought they were. They're kind of a bottom-tier team that's always going to hang around but probably not win many series, and Toronto's kind of the same way. They're more of a bottom-tier team, and, I mean, even despite a 1.14 from Bance, who's probably their worst player, they still had to go to a Game 5 to take this series. They're another one of those teams that it's like, yeah, can they hang with anyone just like LAG? Probably. They can make any series somewhat close. But they're probably never going to beat a top team, really, unless it's like one random upset on some day, but they're not consistently going to be able to beat top teams. So this is just kind of a series for me. There's not a whole lot to take away. And then the first match on Sunday was like the one I was like most excited for on the weekend. It was Paris versus Seattle. I was like, you know what? Paris is kind of coming off a couple hot weeks. They looked pretty good. Surge is starting to look better. So I felt like this was just a 5-game series, like a tight maps waiting to happen. And to say that happened would be like the furthest thing from the truth. I mean, honestly, Seattle pretty much just handled this from start to finish. Everybody on Paris pretty much struggled. Scraps was around to 1. I mean, Aqua, for his standards, especially struggled. Fire, we're going to talk about him in a little bit once again. He had a 0.66. Again, another horrible series from him. And then on the side of Seattle, Octane, he didn't even really have to take over the series. He only had a 1.05. Looney was playing super well. He had around a 0.95. And then Gunless and Prestinni 1.6 and 1.2 respectively. I mean, they looked awesome, especially Gunless. He looked like he was back in MVP form. I tweeted something about that. He looked like he was showing some flashes of that MVP form that we love to see from him. But, I mean, this series, once again, they win the first hard point, Seattle does, by about 50. They dominate the search 6-1 and then 3-0 in the control. I mean, honestly, just an overall clinic, especially from Gunless, like I said. And I don't even know what else to say about this. This was a super telling series for me. we'll talk about once again. I mean, I personally I have thought this for a while. I think that Fire needs to be replaced. I think that Aqua has a super high ceiling in this game. I think Scraps is a super high ceiling in this game. And I think Classic is the perfect dirty work player. I think they just need more of a superstar SMG, kind of what Fire was supposed to be, and he hasn't fulfilled that at all. I think Paris is kind of, I hate to say it because I've had a lot of faith in them all year, I think they're kind of on the downswing. I do think they could pick it up because they do have such good teamwork, and they still have Aqua and Scraps who can kind of take over games for them, and Fire every once in a while has a little bit of flash of some good skill and stuff, and then Classic's pretty consistent, so I do think they have a chance to still win matches and be solid. But I think this is more telling for Seattle because I actually thought coming into this week that Paris is a pretty solid team, and Seattle just took it to them. And Seattle, the one thing that they did do that I feel like gives them, I am by no means here when I say this saying that Seattle will beat or can beat Atlanta if they play them. But if Seattle, I mean, I believe we get Seattle versus OpTic this coming week, and who knows because OpTic's a little bit in shambles right now too. But when Seattle plays a team like OpTic or Dallas or Faze, just those are like the top three teams that always come to mind, or even like New York, teams that probably have more talent than them. The style of play that they played against Paris just might be able to get them the win because Seattle basically took the map and said, you know what, we know we're talented enough to beat pretty much anybody because Gunless, Prestinni, Octane, they're all disgusting. Looney's a good leader, but they just basically said, all right, Looney, lead the troops, and they were playing so methodical and so smart, and like they were planning all their breaks out so well, and everything was just so smooth and like structured. And Chance kept referring to it, and Chance is a very good analyst. We all know that. He just kept referring to how smooth and structured they were the entire time. And to me, I see that as like a way that you can beat the top teams because the top teams are going to out-talent you, and sometimes their structure isn't fantastic. Like Atlanta Faze, they obviously they have some pretty good structure. They wouldn't be undefeated and dominating teams like they are. But every once in a while, as they continue to win, they're maybe going to lose that like solid structure that they are supposed to have. And Seattle, talent-wise, obviously isn't as good as Atlanta, but they can somewhat keep up. I mean, Gunless, Prestinni, Octane, these guys are no slouches. They can keep up. Octane can keep up with Arcitys. Gunless can keep up with Celium when he's on his good days. Prestinni and Looney will obviously get outclassed a little bit, but I mean, Prestinni's a world champ. He can keep up with those two a little bit. But if they're just like on that cusp of just being there and keeping up with them a little bit, and they're playing way more structured, that structure might be enough to steal a map or two. And then all of a sudden, if you steal a map or two, you never know what the way the series can roll if you get momentum and stuff. So I will say this very structured style of gameplay that Seattle's playing is showing a lot of potential for me, and I think that it could help them climb up the rankings a little bit. I'm once again by no means saying all of a sudden if Seattle plays Atlanta, Dallas, OpTic, New York, they're going to beat them, but I would say that structured type of gameplay that I've been seeing out of them gives me a little bit more faith that they have a chance to start maybe taking some top teams the distance, just like they did with Dallas last week. I mean, they took them the distance round 11, game 5. Then the second to last matchup of the weekend was Dallas versus Minnesota. I mean, this obviously isn't as shocking that Minnesota won after we saw them earlier in the week, what they did to OpTic. But, I mean, Dallas is probably in better form than OpTic right now, despite the fact that they aren't in great form. They're probably in a better form than OpTic. But Minnesota takes them out 3-2. Obviously, Dallas won the 2 hard points, and they won them pretty easily. They were both basically 250 to 180. They handle them pretty good, and they lose both searches, kind of like we'd expect with this Minnesota team. And then the control was honestly the shocker, because typically, especially on raid control, Dallas seems to find a way to get the win. But honestly, it was the illey show on that map. He went 37-30, and the rest of the team, I mean, shottzyy was around a 1, and so was Crim, but huke kind of struggled on that map. And then on the side of Minnesota, accuracy, Priesta, and attach played very well. The one thing I will say about this series, obviously, Minnesota wins both searches and the control. I want to tell, like, one thing I want to say for Dallas fans is it's not time to panic. I mean, you have crimsix on your team, and really, your hardpoints look very good. You were able to win both hardpoints against a super talented team. I mean, obviously, Minnesota struggled a lot in hardpoint, but with Standy, they have a lot more slain power, and Priesta is actually Priesta again. He's not the shell of himself that he was earlier this year when he was in the wrong role. And accuracy looks better because the team comp seems to fit better. So, I mean, this is a talented team with a lot of slayers. Like, they can hang and respawn. So, the fact that you beat them by 70 in both hardpoints is very good now that they have Standy. And then usually you're going to win that control. And honestly, you probably should have won that control. And you lose it 2-3. So, like, for Dallas, it's like you have Crim on your team. And you have illey, who's, like, grew up in the search community. Like, I feel like at some point they're going to be able to fix their search. And their respawns are already so good. So, Dallas, it's really not a panic button thing for me. But for Minnesota, I would say, like, yes, you should certainly be happy with your week. You won 2 series. That's obviously awesome. You're not going to complain. You were 0-2 and you look like you couldn't win a map. And then you make a switch and you win against arguably the 2 best teams in your division and maybe 2 of the top 3 teams in the league. That's awesome. That's great. But I will say there's a couple concerns that were raised with Minnesota because we don't want to talk all positive on them. Got to bring some concerns up. Obviously, you lose both hardpoints, you do get handled. That's a concern. You're not going to be able to rely on winning every single search and every control at some point, especially like when you play Atlanta. I doubt you're going to be able to beat Atlanta in a hardpoint. And it's probably not that likely that you're going to be able to beat them in a control. And guess what? Atlanta is also probably the other best search team. So there's a decent chance they can take you on a search. So let's say Atlanta is going to beat you in the game 1 hardpoint and beat you in the game 2 control. Do you really think as Minnesota you can rely on, or the game 2 search, I'm sorry. Do you think as Minnesota you can rely on beating Atlanta in a control and then Atlanta in a hardpoint and then also in a search? I mean, if you're getting beat in the hardpoint and then the search, I mean, even if you win that second search and then lose the hardpoint and go down 2-1 to Atlanta, I doubt you're beating them in a search and a hardpoint to close them out. I mean, like, Minnesota's going to have to improve in respawns. The other thing I would say is, in that control, Standy had 40 deaths. He obviously was putting pressure on the map, and I understand that. He had 7k damage. He went 31-40. He was getting pressure on them and being kind of the entry guy. But at some point, too, like, I think this will just come with him playing in the league a little bit more. You got to get some patience, man. I mean, 40 deaths in control is absolutely absurd, especially in a mode where your lives matter so much. And in a mode where deaths, although it just did get changed apparently, deaths are super, I mean, they play a huge factor in control, because whatever team has the least amount of deaths gets defense, and defense is obviously a lot more powerful in this game. But yeah, my takeaway is Dallas, not really a reason to panic, because all you've got to do is have Crim and illey work on your search and get Rambo and they're working your search, and you're probably a top team again. You're probably number 2 for sure. And then for Minnesota, I'd say you should be super hyped about your takeaways, but pretty soon you've got to find a way to improve that hardpoint, because you can't rely on 2-3-5 every series. It's not always going to work. Somebody's going to beat you in search. And then finally, the last match, OpTic versus Florida. This one did shock me a little bit. I know Florida and the CDL over the last year and a half that's been around has really had OpTic's number, but I honestly expected OpTic, after getting embarrassed 3-0, I expected them to just, I'll be like, all right, hey, we're OpTic, we'll bounce back, we'll get to 2-1, because we don't want to start in losers. But I mean, OpTic came out, and Envoy had a good series based on his KD and stuff. Dashy and Formal struggled a little bit. Scump didn't play awesome in the map 1, but Scump played extremely well in that last control. Obviously, he ended up finishing negative in it, but there was a point in there where he was like way positive, and he was really taking over the map and kind of carrying them along through that checkmate control. But I don't know, it's tough for this series, because yes, I want to say that Florida should be proud. I mean, you 3-0 OpTic, you're always going to be happy with it, but like, the maps were super close. It was 250 to 221. Florida won the first one. Then it was a round 11 on checkmate, and then it was a 3-2 on checkmate. So yes, Florida 3-0'd them, but like, I don't know. It seems like a lot of little things. Like OpTic, I mean, yes, they have a history of ego challenge and just like relying on their talent to win games in the whole Scump and Formal era, but like, they know what they're doing wrong. Like in that search, when Skies is lower wing, and then he smokes Dashy out of half plane or tube, whatever you want to call it, like that. I mean, that one makes sense because Dashy doesn't know where he is. He gets just caught off guard and just smoked. It's like whatever, but I don't know why Envoy challenged. My thought behind it is Envoy's a smart player. I was thinking that Envoy probably went to peek to try to get info on where Skies was going so he could call it out or something. But instead of like giving a little peek, he peeks and then he realizes that Skies is pre-aiming him and he's like, shoot, I gotta take this gunfight. I think just quick reaction, he didn't think to just duck back. He just said, okay, shoot, he's shooting at me, I gotta shoot back, take this gunfight, and it was sub versus AR from that range. Obviously Skies wins it. He beats him, and then OpTic loses that map. The control, same thing. For some reason they go out and try to slay out the spawn instead of just stacking the point. If they stack the point, they probably win it. But like, people on Twitter are saying to them, and on Reddit they're all just like going at OpTic saying like, oh my god, you do this. Like, I mean, this is Scump and Formal. They have 20-something tournament wins. Envoy's a smart player. I mean, Dashy's a smart player. They have tournament wins as well. Like, these people know, like, yeah, we probably should have stacked the point in that, or I probably should have challenged this. But once again, it's a high-pressure situation. You're playing in a match. It's like, it's a lot easier when you're spectating because you have nothing in the game. You have no skin in the game. It's like, you can see easily what they should have done when you're outside the game. It's a lot easier said than done. I think OpTic will watch the VOD. I think they'll be just fine. There's no reason to hit the panic button, like I said on OpTic earlier. Florida, obviously, you should take away that you're super, super positive from this. But at the same time, also, like, for Florida, I'm not going to, like, say that they should be super, super hyped and, like, they're a top team now. The one thing I will say that's very positive to see is this year, Neptune and Awakening have been Florida's two best players, and Skies and Select have been struggling. Skies and Select are the top two KDs in their team with 1.13s, and Select was making some huge plays in that checkmate control. So overall, once again, OpTic, a lot of work to do, a lot of VOD to watch, excuse me. But I think they're going to figure it out. I really think they're going to be just fine. I'm not that worried. We'll talk about it a little bit later about OpTic. I don't want to get too much into it because it's one of the hot take sections. But I think they're going to be fine. And Florida, they're on the upswing for sure. I'm not as high on them as some people were after this match. People were saying they're like a top team again. I do think Florida is certainly good, but I'm not ready to just say because they beat a struggling OpTic team that they're at the top again. But that is it for the matches. Now we're going to move on to, I think I want to do power rankings next. But these are going to go by pretty quickly, and I want to just put a disclaimer out there. These power rankings, I literally just want you all to take them with a grain of salt. They're probably the most useless power rankings I think I've ever done in the history of making this podcast. And the reason I say that is because we had teams like OpTic and Dallas struggle. And the odds are with OpTic and Dallas, probably within a week or two, they'll be back into their form and they'll be top 3, top 4 teams. But the issue is usually like when OpTic and Dallas struggle, even last year, because OpTic, Dallas, and Atlanta, and then even like Florida's kind of like the New York of this year, is how Florida was last year. It's like you kind of know who your top 4 are. When they struggle, the teams behind them aren't doing that well, so you don't really have to move them down. But the issue is with OpTic and Dallas struggling, every single team that is like right behind them, like Minnesota, Florida, London, teams like that, even like New York, if you want to consider them in that group, Seattle, they all look super good. And I don't want to overreact and be like, okay, Dallas and OpTic, you're 7 and 8 now. Because, I mean, let's be honest. If a tournament happened tomorrow, we're probably still picking OpTic and Dallas as like the second and third teams, or like maybe like top 4. We're probably picking them to go top 4, top 6. So like, I don't want to drop them all. That's why I say I don't want any criticism for these power rankings, because it's basically a wait and see game for me. I don't want to, you know how I do my power rankings typically. I don't like to overreact until I see a couple weeks of consistency out of a team. Or if I see OpTic and Dallas continue to struggle for the next week or two, then they'll start to get dropped a lot. I did drop them both a bit. But like I said, Minnesota's up there, and Florida moved up a little bit, Seattle moved up. But for my power rankings, I don't want you to be like, oh my God, how do you have OpTic ahead of Minnesota or something? Because for me, I like to see a couple weeks of consistency. Right now, yes, Minnesota is probably better than OpTic since they beat them. But at the same time, OpTic has been so good all year, and Minnesota has been so bad all year, that one good week to me doesn't justify throwing them above them. Now, next week, if Minnesota comes out, they look amazing again, and OpTic loses both their matches and they look shaky, then certainly Minnesota will be ahead of OpTic and will drop them. But for me, if a team's been in the top 3 in the power rankings, like unanimously for the entire season, we have 6, 7, 8 weeks of gameplay that they were in the top 3 undoubtedly for Dallas and Chicago. Then all of a sudden they have one bad week, and a team who's been in the bottom 4 for the entire year has one good week. We can't jump them. So like for now, I had to keep Empire and Chicago up towards the top just because this is one bad week that they have. So it's hard to just like throw them out. But that doesn't mean that I think that they're like better than Minnesota, if that makes sense right now. It's just weird. I like to have consistency in my power rankings. In order to jump in the power rankings by a lot, you have to have multiple good weeks. It can't just be one showing. I'm not like a super impulsive power rankings person. The same way in sports, I've always been the same way. But we'll just get into it. At number 12, I've got LAG. To me, they're the lowest potential team. The teams that I have like right above them, like Toronto, Thieves, Legion, Royal Ravens, I see them all as teams that could potentially upset people and could improve, like Thieves with a new roster. I mean, maybe it'll take a little time. I could see them improving. I could see Toronto continuing to improve. I could see Paris bouncing back. London seems to be improving. I can see that. But LAG, I just don't see where they improve. They have the lowest ceiling to me, so they're in my 12th spot. Then in 11, I have Toronto Ultra. Once again, kind of a lower ceiling team, but I do feel like they have more upset potential than LAG, so they go ahead of them. Number 10, by far the lowest they've been all year, is LA Thieves. Right now, they seem to be in shambles. It seems like they're about to make another roster change, potentially. Kenny seemed to be hinting at that, maybe. Temp maybe hinted that he was back in or something. So, yeah, I mean, LA Thieves, this is the lowest they've been. I do certainly think they could jump back up. I mean, whenever you got like Slasher, Teach, Kenny, those guys, even Temp, if he comes back on your roster, you have potential, but right now their ceiling's low. We saw them go 0-2. And they got thoroughly dominated by Atlanta, so I'm just leaving them at 10 for now. And then 9, this one kind of breaks my heart. They dropped a little bit from last week, is Paris. They had an 0-2 week. In 2, I mean, obviously they probably were expected to beat Dallas, but Surge's, if they want to be a middle-of-the-pack team or upper middle, Paris has to beat a team like Surge, who's also kind of like middle of the pack right now, upper middle. That's a match they needed to win, and they got handled pretty easily 3-0, so they had to drop a little bit. But once again, I have them ahead of the teams below them because I think their skill ceiling is a little bit higher. I still do think that they have the potential to make any series close, and I certainly hope that they do because I kind of like Paris. They're kind of one of my teams I'm rooting for this year. But then number 8, by far their highest showing of the year, they haven't really gotten higher than 11 ever, is London Royal Ravens. The reason I have them ahead of Paris is because Paul X looks like a superstar. Zed's playing extremely well. Shawnee's been Mr. Consistent like he always is. And then Dylan has also looked improved. So to me, like right now, Paris is kind of on the downswing and London is on the up, which is why I would put London ahead of Paris. I do think that they're interchangeable. If you would put Paris at 8 and London at 9, I wouldn't really have too much of an issue with it. But I'm putting London at 8 because simply right now I think Dylan is on the upswing. I think Zed is on the upswing, and I think Paul's on the upswing, and Shawnee's who he always is. Well, Paris is on a little bit of a fall, so I think London's pretty good. I think 8 puts them, I think they have a pretty high ceiling. I once again still think that if they play any of the top teams, they probably lose, but they're not like a punching bag like they were in stage 1. Then at number 7, by far their highest showing of the year as well, Seattle Surge. I do think that you could put Surge at 6 ahead of my 6th team, which is Mutineers. The reason I go Mutineers 6 and Surge 7 is because I think Mutineers has shown more potential over like the last month. They've been kind of hot and cold showing their potential, and Surge has only recently over the last 2 weeks shown their potential. So I think we've seen a bigger body of work of Mutineers playing well than Surge. Surge has been a lot more short-term and short-lived playing well. I actually do think after this next week, especially if Surge is able to take out OpTic, I think Surge could jump and be in the 6th spot over Mutineers. Although Mutineers is at a 3-0 over OpTic, they look very good. I think these two are pretty much interchangeable, but I go Surge at 7 and Mutineers at 6 simply because Mutineers have been a little bit more consistently good this year so far. And then at 5, I do have Minnesota. Like I said, I can understand you putting, and I have no problem with you putting Minnesota over OpTic and putting OpTic at 5. However, I wouldn't put Florida over OpTic because once again, they did beat them, yes, but I mean, I'm trying to think of a good example of it. Like, there's random teams all the time. Like, I remember back in like the Black Ops 3 Pro League or whatever, like Epsilon or somebody. Maybe that was a different Pro League. Or maybe it was World War II. Epsilon was like 1-13 and they beat OpTic. Or are you going to throw them ahead of OpTic, who was like 14-2 at the time or whatever? Like, you're not going to throw them ahead of somebody like that. Like, I don't understand putting Florida over OpTic because they've been pretty inconsistent this year, and so is Minnesota. But Minnesota looked like they could be the best team in the league with their wins this week and the way they dominated. So I do understand if you put Minnesota over like OpTic and maybe Dallas. If you do power rankings more based on like recency bias and like whoever is hot at the time, then 100% yeah, you should put Minnesota. But mine is more of the body of work, like I always say. So I've got Minnesota at 5 and OpTic at 4, simply because OpTic's been so good all year except for this week, and Minnesota has been so bad all year except for this week. So I'm keeping Minnesota at 5 and then OpTic at 4. And then the next are pretty easy. 3, I'm putting Empire. I do honestly still think that Empire are a better team than New York. But New York, they've both been consistently good all year, and New York looks a lot better right now. Dallas has had some recent struggles. New York just looks like a solid team that is going to beat every team that they should beat, and then play those teams that are on their level tightly. So I put New York at 2, simply because I think that them and Dallas are relatively even, and New York is just a little hotter right now. But I have no problem if you put Dallas at 2, because I do think overall, push comes to shove, if I absolutely had to make a prediction, I think I'd still pick Dallas to beat New York. But they're on about the same level, and New York is better recently, so I'll put New York at 2, give them some credit. And then number 1 is obvious Atlanta Faze. If you don't have Faze at 1, you're delusional. They're far and away, like I say every single week, the best team. And yeah, that's the power rankings. We go 1 Atlanta, 2 New York, 3 Dallas, 4 Chicago, 5 Minnesota, 6 Florida, 7 Seattle, 8 London, 9 Paris, 10 LA Thieves, 11 Toronto Ultra, and 12 LAG. And like I said, disclaimer on the power rankings is that like 3 to 7 or like 3 to 8 is literally just a bloodbath right now. And I'd like to not overreact and drop OpTic or Dallas below the newly hot teams. But if Minnesota, once again, comes out super hot and OpTic or Dallas look a little weak, Minnesota will certainly jump one, if not both of those teams. Then now I talked about that new segment. I'd like to get into that. The video is probably at about like 40 minutes right now, so I kind of want to go through the rest of the stuff I have to talk about in like 10 minutes or less so we don't get too long. But this new segment I wanted to do, I want to call it Hot or Not. So once again, as a disclaimer, I may or may not believe this take fully, and you'll know which one I probably don't really believe, but I want to offer like a controversial take, and have you guys say in the comments, is it hot, meaning you agree with it, that's a good take, and like say why you agree with it, or you say it's not hot, and why you disagree with it. So the first one I'm going to do, and I want you guys to comment that down below, because I want this to be a segment where we get discussion going between not only me and you guys, but maybe a couple of you get a discussion going and stuff. So comment down below your thoughts on each one of these. Like, you can do it in separate comments or do it in the same comment. Say like, first take, this one's on Paris, say hot or not and why, and then go on to the next one. So my first hot take involves Paris. Like I said, I believe they completely dropped the ball in not picking up Hydra before the season started. He's a French guy. I mean, you're Paris. You can build around a French player that's supposed to be a phenom. I mean, that was the biggest no-brainer. I mean, there's not a ton of like top COD pros really that have ever come from France. The only one that ever comes to mind is Gotaga. But other than that, like, there's no pros. I mean, like Brezzi maybe. He's not even in the league anymore. But like, there's no really top pros that come to mind from Paris or from France. I guess I don't know if Hydra's from Paris, from France in general. So why was Hydra not picked up to build around him, like a French guy, and you could build around him? Or not even going after, like, why didn't you go after somebody like Standy or Neptune early in the season instead of Fire? The hot take for me is that if this team wants to hit that next level that I believe they can hit, they need to replace Fire. He's supposed to be like the young superstar, some machine gun to help hard carry them, and he is, in my opinion, the least mechanically skilled player on their team right now. I think Scraps, Aqua, and Classic all have a higher skill ceiling than Fire right now. And he's supposed to be their main SMG, their main Slayer. And I think if they had a higher skill ceiling player that was actually a superstar at their main sub instead of him, they could be a top 5 team. Unfortunately, though, I think they like probably the point that they're at as an organization, since they're like a fringe playoff team now. Like, they have a chance to be like towards the bottom of the playoff bracket for champs. And I think they like that because it's better than where they were last year, where they were like the laughingstock of the league, the bottom of the barrel. So I don't think they're going to make a change. And I'm not saying that Fire like shouldn't be in the league. I don't want to just destroy the kid's confidence because he's a new player in the league. I think he certainly deserves a spot in the league. Especially if we do like have expansion or something, because he's a young and talented player. I just don't think I see him as a superstar, at least not yet. He's more of like a role player to me, like the objective kind of dirty work SMG. But this team is asking him to be a superstar on the SMG and like take over games. So in general, I would say my hot take is that if this team wants to hit its peak and hit the next level and have potential to win tournaments, Fire needs to be replaced with more of a guy that can be a superstar SMG. Once again, don't think he deserves to be out of the league, but I think the hot take is Fire needs to be replaced if Paris wants to hit the next level. Then the next hot take, so comment down below once again your thoughts on that Fire one. Was that a hot take or not it? And then why? And the second one, this is probably the one that I would definitely say fits under the I don't necessarily fully buy into it category, but I did hear Nameless on the broadcast following one of the LA Thieves matches. I believe it was Nameless. It might have been Study, but he mentioned that a comment that I thought made for some interesting debate. It was the fact that LA Thieves or OGLA from last year have used this core of Slasher, Kenny, and Tej for like a year and a half now, and have seen basically no success besides maybe one fluke second place when they had Chino, and then an okay run at Champs. But they've seen almost no success with that core. So Nameless said it was time to blow up that core by either getting rid of one or maybe two of them. Once again, I don't know how I feel about this because it's obviously a super hot take. But there are some top players. These are some of the top players out there. Slasher, Kenny, Tej, some of the top players in the league. And I personally would never drop Kenny because you guys know how I feel about him. I'd be one of the players that I build a franchise around. And then Slasher is hard to drop mid-season because, like, if it's the off-season, yeah, you could find guys like an Octane or an Arcitys, or, I mean, it's hard to find, like, Methods even. I mean, he's maybe not Slash level, but, like, Methods or Formal or any of those guys. Skies even. You can find some of those guys in the off-season if they're available, but it's hard to drop Slasher mid-season because I doubt you're going to be able to find an AR as good as him that's just available in the middle of a season. So it may fall on a guy like TJ to be dropped. I'd say overall the hot take would be that, do you agree or disagree that LA Thieves would need to break up its core 3 in order to actually hit that next level? And we are hearing that Kenny could maybe be benched, but I'll riot if it's Kenny. I don't think it should be Kenny. But, like, so basically, do you think that LA Thieves needs to break up that core 3 of Kenny, TJ, and Slasher, being that they drop all 3 or 1 or 2 of them? Do you believe they need to break them up to hit the next level? Then the last take we'll get into is on OpTic. I got to talk about them. They're the most popular team and stuff. They have the most speculation behind them and probably the most people with an opinion on them. So my hot take on OpTic, and this is one I actually do believe in, is they're going to be just fine. It seems like the cycle is the same every single year with OpTic Gaming, especially in the Scump era, which is basically the era we've all watched. They start out super hot. They look like a top team. And maybe this year they didn't look like the top team like they normally did because Faze was probably better. But they honestly could have beaten Faze in that first match. OpTic starts out, they look like a top team. They're probably maybe the best team, or at least top 3 for like the first event, maybe a little bit after, and then they start to fall into a spiral. Every single fan panics. They start to just criticize them everywhere on like Twitter and everything. And then OpTic starts to pick it back up towards like the middle end of the season and starts to get better. And then come champs time, they're right back into the top 3 and they almost win it and or at least get close. It's crazy that this has to be a hot take or whatever, because it really shouldn't be, but the way everybody is talking crazy on Twitter and Reddit right now makes this a hot take. So I mean, overall, my hot take is that OpTic is going to be just fine. They may continue to struggle a little bit in the short term. They may not look good for the rest of Stage 2. They might have a bad finish at the Major, but overall, by the time like the end of Stage 3, going into Stage 4, and especially like Stage 5, they'll be just fine. So the hot take here that you got to comment on, is it hot or not, is the fact that OpTic is going to be just fine. They might continue to struggle in the short term, but in the long term this year, they're still going to end up being one of the top teams by the end. That's the hot take on this one. So like I said, that's the new segment I want to do. Comment down below if the take was hot, meaning that you agreed with it, or the take was not, and why not. And like I said, this isn't something I want you to come at me and attack me for, because these aren't necessarily takes that I fully believe in, but I feel like they're takes that you can have a valid opinion on both sides. Like I feel like you can have a valid opinion on why you would or wouldn't keep Fire, and why you do think that LA Thieves needs to make a change to its core, or maybe it doesn't because they're super talented, or maybe because of OpTic's recent struggles you don't think they're going to be fine, or because they're OpTic and they have that talent, they are going to be fine. So like, just comment down below your thoughts on each one. I feel like it's something that could be really fun to get a discussion going in the comments with. Then lastly, not hot takes anymore, but we're going to hit up the rumor mill real quickly with just like 1 or 2 things and just like some news I've seen with some rosters, and then as well with the game. But apparently Kenny could be benched. I know I mentioned the whole LA Thieves breaking the core 3 up thing just a second ago, but you all know Kenny would be on my team if I had a franchise. I'm taking Simp, BZ, Kenny, and probably Octane or Arcitys or something, and I'm dominating the league if I could pick any 4 players. So benching Kenny would be absolutely absurd in my opinion, but if he's actually benched, my thoughts on it, the first thing I thought of when I heard Kenny could be benched in favor of, I would assume they're probably bringing Temp back in, then putting Tejan, Venom on the subs, and maybe putting Temp on the flex, and then Slasher on the AR. That's what I would assume if they're putting Temp back in for Kenny, if that's true. But if Kenny's benched, in my opinion, the first thing I think of is Paris needs to offer LA Thieves the absolute bag of money and whatever they want to get him on the team to replace Fire. Because a team with Aqua on that AR, the way he's playing this year, and then Scraps on the flex, the way he's playing, and then also having Classic and Kenny on the subs, kind of Classic being your dirty work guy, and then Kenny flying in after and being like the roaming Slayer on the SMG, that team would be gross. So, I mean, if Kenny's benched, I'm going to ride. I think it's stupid because Kenny's one of the most talented players in the league. I think he's one of the best players. I think he fits in any team because he can always run flex or sub. But my opinion is Paris needs to hit him up and get Kenny on that team, because if Kenny goes to Paris instead of Fire, that's going to be like my favorite team this year. But then the other thing is not really like roster news, but it's game news. So there's huge weapon tunings incoming. Now, this happened like 30 seconds before I started the podcast. I saw it come across my phone. Apparently, like, I don't know for sure, but I thought it said like the Krig got a buff and like the Milano got a buff, but basically every other sub was nerfed because they nerfed like the barrels or like grips or something on them, like they're not as good or something like that. But I am very interested to see how this affects the meta. I think it could make the game a lot more entertaining if the Krig is more like a statue main AR now, where it's just beams from long range, and then the subs are maybe better from up close and can still fry. They should obviously be better than a Krig from up close, and they can still fry, but then they also like can't pull up from long range as much. It's going to make the game a lot more balanced because there's actually going to be a true flex roll on certain maps. And once again, this meta shift might help. Who better than anyone? Maybe the Seattle Surge, because who's probably the most talented flex in the game when there's a true flex? Probably Gunless. So if there now becomes a true flex, that's like one of the biggest skill gaps you can have, is having a player on your team, because if there's a true flex and they're switching between sub and AR on certain maps, one of the biggest skill gaps you can have is a guy that's elite at doing that. Gunless is like the best ever at doing that. Guys like him, Karma, Krim are like the 3 that come to mind in terms of like really, really good flexes. So I'm very interested to see how this affects the meta. I hope it does. I hope that the 74U is a lot worse from range now, because it's going to make the meta a lot more interesting and play like a real COD and not just have subs pulling up from across the map. Although I use a sub and sometimes I like to take those chows because it's fun. I understand that for the quality of watching the game and playing the game, the sub should build a map like that. So I'm interested to see if it actually affects it or if the subs are still gross from long range. And then the last little bit of news that I wanted to say is that League play is finally getting some much needed changes. I thought I saw that like coming later tonight, Overkill, you can't use 2 primary weapons now, which is the best thing ever for search because there's no punishment for using sniper. And now you'll only be able to use a pistol as your secondary with your sniper. So, I mean, if you actually get pushed out as a sniper, you won't just be able to flip over to your 74U and fry. Like, there's actually a penalty now for it, which is awesome. I think it'll make search and destroy better in League play. And then the perk greed is gone, so you can't have 6 perks. Honestly, it's just kind of nice to have it because you don't have to worry about ever getting flashed or like killed by a nade or anything. Because I mean, you're not getting what am I trying to say here? You're not you always have those 2 perks and stuff in League play. But, I mean, obviously for the quality of the game, it's certainly good that they're taking it out. And I believe, for some reason, I think that means that like quartermaster, whatever it is, where you get 2 trophies, probably won't be used in League play anymore, because I want to say there's a better perk in that slot. I can't really remember. So League play might improve greatly, because that might mean there's a lot less trophies in the map, and people have to choose between tack and flag, so you're going to be able to either stun or nade people. So, like, this might make the game a lot better. And then there's also penalties now and punishments for repeatedly leaving games. Which is good because people leave games so easily, and it's kind of annoying. Like when I'm playing with my squad of 4, if we're playing like control and we absolutely destroy them in round 1, they all leave except for 2 people. Then you sit here playing an extra 10 minutes for no reason while it's a 4-on-2 or something. So it's good that they're adding penalties. Obviously, we still need the elo system, but that's not happening. So at least they're improving the way that we play the game. But I think that's going to do it for this episode. I really got into everything I wanted to. We talked in great detail about the matches. Did our wacky power rankings that who even knows what's going on with those. And then we even did a new segment here, the hot or not segment. I really like that idea. And like I said, comment down below if you have ideas for different hot or not segments. Obviously, they might not apply as much if we wait a week to make the next episode after the next matches. But like, let's say you're watching the matches this weekend, and on Friday somebody fries and like somebody struggles and you have just a random hot take, just tweet it at me. I'll just like drop a like on it so I can like have a place to save it or something. And I mean, don't feel offended if I don't respond to your hot take on Twitter, because I don't want to give away what I think. I might be like, wow, that's a really good hot take, and I might just say, hey, I'm going to use this in the video or something, and then I'll offer my thoughts in the next video or something. So yeah, do that. And also obviously comment down below whether you agreed or not with the hot takes. That's kind of what that segment is for, is to spark discussion. But that's going to do it. Please be sure to leave a like, comment, and sub if you enjoyed. Share the video with a friend who likes the CDL. We've been a bit stagnant in growth lately in terms of like subs and stuff, but that's going to happen. Regardless, I always appreciate the love you guys show, and I'll be posting a predictions video hopefully tomorrow if I can get it all done. If I can find some time to get it all done. But yeah, that's going to do it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video, which will probably be, like I said, tomorrow or Wednesday with the predictions. Thanks for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed watching the matches this weekend, and I will see you guys in the next one. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks for watching.